Chapter 1. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. We're moving today. I'm so scared, God. I've never lived anywhere but here. Suppose I hate my new school. Suppose everybody there hates me. Please help me, God. Don't let New Jersey be too horrible. Thank you. We moved on the Tuesday before Labor Day. I knew what the weather was like the second I got up. I knew because I caught my mother sniffing under her arms. She always does that when it's hot and humid, to make sure her deodorant's working. I don't use deodorant yet. I don't think people start to smell bad until they're at least 12, so I've still got a few months to go. I was really surprised when I came home from camp and found out our New York apartment had been rented to another family and that we owned a house in Farbrook, New Jersey. First of all, I never even heard of Farbrook, and second of all, I'm not usually left out of important family decisions. But when I groaned, "Why New Jersey?" I was told. Long Island is too social, Westchester is too expensive, and Connecticut is too inconvenient. So Farbrook, New Jersey it was, where my father could commute to his job in Manhattan, where I could go to public school, and where my mother could have all the grass, trees, and flowers she ever wanted, except I never knew she wanted that stuff in the first place. The new house is on Morningbird Lane. It isn't bad. It's part brick, part wood. The shutters and front door are painted black. Also, there is a very nice brass knocker. Every house on our new street looks a lot the same. They are all 7 years old. So are the trees. I think we left the city because of my grandmother, Sylvia Simon. I can't figure out any other reason for the move, especially since my mother says Grandma is too much of an influence on me. It's no big secret in our family that Grandma sends me to summer camp in New Hampshire, and that she enjoys paying my private school tuition, what she won't be able to do anymore because now I'll be going to public school. She even knits me sweaters that have labels sewed inside saying, "Made expressly for you by Grandma." And she doesn't do all that because we're poor. I know for a fact that we're not. I mean, we aren't rich, but we certainly have enough, especially since I'm an only child. That cuts way down on food and clothes. I know this family that has 7 kids, and every time they go to the shoe store, it costs a bundle. My mother and father didn't plan for me to be an only child, but that's the way it worked out, which is fine with me because this way I don't have anybody around to fight. Anyhow, I figure this house in New Jersey business is my parents' way of getting me away from Grandma. She doesn't have a car, she hates buses, and she thinks all trains are dirty. So unless Grandma plans to walk, which is unlikely, I won't be seeing much of her. Now, some kids might think, who cares about seeing a grandmother? But Sylvia Simon is a lot of fun, considering her age, which I happen to know is 60. The only problem is she's always asking me if I have boyfriends and if they're Jewish. Now that is ridiculous, because number 1, I don't have boyfriends, and number 2, what would I care if they're Jewish or not? Chapter 2. We hadn't been in the new house more than an hour when the doorbell rang. I answered. It was this girl in a bathing suit. "Hi," she said. "I'm Nancy Wheeler. The real estate agent sent out a sheet on you, so I know you're Margaret and you're in 6th grade. So am I." I wondered what else she knew. "It's plenty hot, isn't it?" Nancy asked. "Yes," I agreed. She was taller than me and had bouncy hair, the kind I'm hoping to grow. Her nose turned up so much I could look right into her nostrils. Nancy leaned against the door. "Well, you want to come over and go under the sprinklers?" "I don't know. I'll have to ask." "Okay, I'll wait." I found my mother with her rear end sticking out of a bottom kitchen cabinet. She was arranging her pots and pans. "Hey, Mom, there's a girl here who wants to know if I can go under her sprinklers." "If you want to," my mother said. "I need my bathing suit," I said. Gads, Margaret, I don't know where a bathing suit is in this mess. I walked back to the front door and told Nancy, I can't find my bathing suit. You can borrow one of mine, she said. Wait a second, I said, running back to the kitchen. Hey, Mom, she says I can wear one of hers, okay? Okay, my mother mumbled from inside the cabinet. Then she backed out. She spit her hair out of her face. What did you say her name was? Wheeler, Nancy Wheeler. Okay, have a good time, my mother said. Nancy lives 6 houses away, also on Morningbird Lane. Her house looks like mine, but the brick is painted white and the front door and shutters are red. Come on in, Nancy said. I followed her into the foyer, then up the 4 stairs leading to the bedrooms. The first thing I noticed about Nancy's room was the dressing table with the heart-shaped mirror over it. Also, everything was very neat. When I was little, I wanted a dressing table like that, the kind that's wrapped up in a fluffy organdy skirt. I never got one, though, because my mother likes tailored things. Nancy opened her bottom dresser drawer. When's your birthday? She asked. March, I told her. Great, we'll be in the same class. There are 3 6th grades and they arrange us by age. I'm April. Well, I don't know what class I'm in, but I know it's room 18. They sent me a lot of forms to fill out last week, and that was printed on all of them. I told you we'd be together. I'm in room 18, too. Nancy handed me a yellow bathing suit. It's clean, she said. My mother always washes them after a wearing. Thank you, I said, taking the suit. Where should I change? Nancy looked around the room. What's wrong with here? Nothing, I said. I don't mind if you don't mind. Why should I mind? I don't know. I worked the suit on from the bottom. I knew it was going to be too big. Nancy gave me the creeps the way she sat on her bed and watched me. I left my polo on until the last possible second. I wasn't about to let her see I wasn't growing yet. That was my business. Oh, you're still flat, Nancy laughed. Not exactly, I said, pretending to be very cool. I'm small-boned is all. I'm growing already, Nancy said, sticking her chest way out. In a few years, I'm going to look like one of those girls in Playboy. Well, I didn't think so, but I didn't say anything. My father gets Playboy, and I've seen those girls in the middle. Nancy looked like she had a long way to go, almost as far as me. Want me to do up your straps? She asked. Okay. I figured you'd be real grown up coming from New York. City girls are supposed to grow up a lot faster. Did you ever kiss a boy? You mean really kiss? On the lips? I asked. Yes, Nancy said impatiently. Did you? Not really, I admitted. Nancy breathed a sigh of relief. Neither did I. I was overjoyed. Before she said that, I was beginning to feel like some kind of underdeveloped little kid. I practice a lot, though, Nancy said. Practice what? I asked. Kissing. Isn't that what we were talking about? Kissing. How can you practice that? I asked. Watch this. Nancy grabbed her bed pillow and embraced it. She gave it a long kiss. When she was done, she threw the pillow back on the bed. It's important to experiment, so when the time comes, you're all ready. I'm going to be a great kisser someday. Want to see something else? I just stood there with my mouth half open. Nancy sat down at her dressing table and opened a drawer. Look at this, she said. I looked. There were a million little bottles, jars, and tubes. There were more cosmetics in that drawer than my mother had altogether. I asked, what do you do with all that stuff? It's another one of my experiments, to see how I look best, so when the time comes, I'll be ready. She opened a lipstick and painted on a bright pink mouth. Well, what do you think? I don't know. It's kind of bright, isn't it? Nancy studied herself in the heart-shaped mirror. She rubbed her lips together. Well, maybe you're right. She wiped off the lipstick with a tissue. My mother would kill me if I came out like this anyway. I can't wait till 8th grade. That's when I'll be allowed to wear lipstick every day. Then she whipped out a hairbrush and started to brush her long brown hair. She parted it in the middle and caught it at the back with a barrette. Do you always wear your hair like that? She asked me. My hand went up to the back of my neck. I felt all the bobby pins I'd used to pin my hair up so my neck wouldn't sweat. I knew it looked terrible. I'm letting it grow, I said. It's at that in-between stage now. My mother thinks I should wear it over my ears, though. My ears stick out a little. I noticed, Nancy said. I got the feeling that Nancy noticed everything. Ready to go? She asked. Sure. She opened a linen closet in the hall and handed me a purple towel. I followed her down the stairs and into the kitchen, where she grabbed 2 peaches out of the refrigerator and handed one to me. Want to meet my mom? She asked. Okay, I said, taking a bite of my peach. She's 38, but tells us she's 25. Isn't that a scream? Nancy snorted. Mrs. Wheeler was on the porch with her legs tucked under her and a book on her lap. I couldn't tell what book it was. She was suntanned and had the same nose as Nancy. Mom, this is Margaret Simon, who just moved in down the street. Mrs. Wheeler took off her glasses and smiled at me. Hello, I said. Hello, Margaret. I'm very glad to meet you. You're from New York, aren't you? Yes, I am. East Side or West? We lived on West 67th, near Lincoln Center. How nice. Does your father still work in the city? Yes. And what does he do? He's in insurance. I sounded like a computer. How nice. Please tell your mother I'm looking forward to meeting her. We've got a Morning Bird Lane bowling team on Mondays and a bridge game every other Thursday afternoon and I don't think my mother knows how to bowl and she wouldn't be interested in bridge. She paints most of the day, I explained. She paints? Mrs. Wheeler asked. Yes. How interesting. What does she paint? Mostly pictures of fruits and vegetables, sometimes flowers too. Mrs. Wheeler laughed. Oh, you mean pictures. I thought you meant walls. Tell your mother we're making our carpools early this year. We'd be happy to help her arrange hers, especially Sunday school. That's always the biggest problem. I don't go to Sunday school. You don't? No. Lucky, Nancy shouted. Nancy, please, Mrs. Wheeler said. Hey, Mom, Margaret came to go under the sprinkler with me, not to go through the 3rd degree. All right. If you see Evan, tell him I want to talk to him. Nancy grabbed me by the hand and pulled me outside. I'm sorry my mother's so nosy. I didn't mind, I said. Who's Evan? He's my brother. He's disgusting. Disgusting how? I asked. Because he's 14. All boys of 14 are disgusting. They're only interested in 2 things. Pictures of naked girls and dirty books. Nancy really seemed to know a lot. Since I didn't know any boys of 14, I took her word for it. Nancy turned on the outside faucet and adjusted it so that the water sprayed lightly from the sprinkler. Follow the leader, she called, running through the water. I guessed Nancy was the leader. She jumped through the spray. I followed. She turned cartwheels. I tried but didn't make it. She did leaps through the air. I did too. She stood straight under the spray. I did the same. That's when the water came on full blast. We both got drenched, including our hair. Evan, you stinker, Nancy shrieked. I'm telling. She ran off to the house and left me alone with 2 boys. Who are you? Evan asked. I'm Margaret. We just moved in. Oh, this is Moose, he said, pointing to the other boy. I nodded. Hey, Moose said, if you just moved in, ask your father if he's interested in having me cut his lawn. $5 a week and I trim too. What'd you say your last name was? I didn't, but it's Simon. I couldn't help thinking about what Nancy said, that all they were interested in was dirty books and naked girls. I held my towel tight around me in case they were trying to sneak a look down my bathing suit. Evan, come in here this instant, Mrs. Wheeler hollered from the porch. I'm coming, Evan muttered. After Evan went inside, Moose said, Don't forget to tell your father, Moose Freed. I'm in the phone book. I won't forget, I promised. Moose nibbled a piece of grass. Then the back door slammed and Nancy came out, red-eyed and sniffling. Hey, Nancy, baby, can't you take a joke? Moose asked. Shut up, animal, Nancy yelled. Then she turned to me. I'm sorry they had to act like that on your first day here. Come on, I'll walk you home. Nancy had my clothes wrapped up in a little bundle. She was still in her wetsuit. She pointed out who lived in each house between mine and hers. "We're going to the beach for Labor Day weekend," she said. "So call for me on the first day of school and we'll walk together. I'm absolutely dying to know who our teacher's going to be. Miss Phipps, who we were supposed to have, ran off with some guy to California last June, so we're getting somebody new." When we got to my house, I told Nancy if she'd wait a minute, I'd give her back her bathing suit. "I don't need it in a hurry. Tell your mother to wash it and you can give it back next week. It's an old one." I was sorry she told me that, even if I'd already guessed it. I mean, probably I wouldn't lend a stranger my best bathing suit either, but I wouldn't come right out and say it. "Oh, listen, Margaret," Nancy said. "On the first day of school, wear loafers, but no socks." "How come?" "Otherwise you'll look like a baby." "Oh. Besides, I want you to join my secret club, and if you're wearing socks, the other kids might not want you." "What kind of secret club?" I asked. "I'll tell you about it when school starts." "Okay," I said. "And remember, no socks." "I'll remember." We went to a hamburger place for supper. I told my father about moose Fried. "Only $5 a cutting, and he trims too." "No thanks," my father said. "I'm looking forward to cutting it myself. That's one of the reasons we moved out here. Gardening is good for the soul." My mother beamed. They were really driving me crazy with all that good for the soul business. I wondered when they became such nature lovers. Later, when I was getting ready for bed, I walked into a closet, thinking it was the bathroom. Would I ever get used to living in this house? When I finally made it into bed and turned out the light, I saw shadows on my wall. I tried to shut my eyes and not think about them, but I kept checking to see if they were still there. I couldn't fall asleep. "Are you there, God?" "It's me, Margaret. I'm in my new bedroom, but I still have the same bed. It's so quiet here at night. Nothing like the city. I see shadows on my wall and hear these funny creaking sounds. It's scary, God. Even though my father says all houses make noises and the shadows are only trees. I hope he knows what he's talking about. I met a girl today. Her name's Nancy. She expected me to be very grown up. I think she was disappointed. Don't you think it's time for me to start growing, God? If you could arrange it, I'd be very glad. Thank you." My parents don't know I actually talk to God. I mean, if I told them, they'd think I was some kind of religious fanatic or something, so I keep it very private. I can talk to him without moving my lips if I have to. My mother says God is a nice idea. He belongs to everybody. Chapter 3. The next day we went to the hardware store where my father bought a deluxe power lawnmower. That evening, after our first at-home in New Jersey supper, turkey sandwiches from the local delicatessen, my father went out to cut the grass with his new mower. He did fine on the front, but when he got around to the backyard, he had to check to see how much grass there was in the bag on the mower. It's a very simple thing to do. The man at the hardware store demonstrated just how to do it. Only you have to turn the mower off before you reach inside, and my father forgot that. I heard him yell, "Barbara, I've had an accident." He ran to the house. He grabbed a towel and wrapped it around his hand before I had a chance to see anything. Then he sat down on the floor and turned very pale. "Oh my God," my mother said when the blood seeped through the towel. "Did you cut it off?" When I heard that, I raced outside to look for the limb. I didn't know if they were talking about the whole hand or what, but I had read about how you're supposed to save limbs if they get cut off because sometimes the doctor can sew them back on. I thought it was a good thing they had me around to think of those things. But I couldn't find a hand or any fingers, and by the time I came back into the house, the police were there. My mother was on the floor, too, with my father's head in her lap. I rode in the police car with them since there was no one at home to stay with me. I had a silent talk with God on the way to the hospital. I said this inside my head so no one would notice. "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. My father's had an awful accident. Please help him, God. He's really very kind and nice. Even though he doesn't know you the way I do, he's a good father, and he needs his hand, God. So please, please let him be all right. I'll do anything you say if you help him. Thank you, God." It turned out that my father hadn't cut off anything, but it took 8 stitches to sew up his finger. The doctor who sewed him was Dr. Potter. After he was through with my father, he came out to chat. When he saw me, he said, "I have a daughter about your age." I love the way people always think they know somebody your age until you tell them how old you really are. "I'm going on 12, I said. "Gretchen is almost 12 too," the doctor said. Well, he was right about my age. "She'll be in 6th grade at Delano School." "So will you, Margaret," my mother reminded me. As if I needed reminding. "I'll tell Gretchen to look for you," Dr. Potter said. "Fine," I told him. As soon as we got home from the hospital, my father told my mother to look up Moose Freed in the phone book and arrange for him to cut our lawn once a week. On Labor Day, I got up early. I wanted to fix up my desk in my room before school started. I'd bought a pile of paper, pencils, erasers, reinforcements, and paper clips. I'm always real neat until about October. While I was in the middle of this project, I heard a noise. It sounded like somebody knocking. I waited to see if my parents would wake up. I tiptoed to their room, but the door was still closed, and it was quiet, so I knew they were asleep. When I heard the knocking again, I went downstairs to investigate. I wasn't scared because I knew I could always scream, and my father would rescue me if it turned out to be a burglar or a kidnapper. The knocking came from the front door. Nancy was away for the weekend, so it couldn't be her, and we really didn't know anybody else. "Who is it?" I asked, pressing my ear to the door. "It's Grandma, Margaret. Open up." I unlatched the chain and both locks and flung open the door. "Grandma, I can't believe it. You're really here." "Surprise," Grandma called. I put a finger over my lips to let her know my parents were still asleep. Grandma was loaded down with Bloomingdale's shopping bags, but when she stepped into the house, she lined them up on the floor and gave me a big hug and kiss. "My Margaret," she said, flashing her special smile. When she smiles like that, she shows all her top teeth. They aren't her real teeth. It's what Grandma calls a bridge. She can take out a whole section of 4 top teeth when she wants to. She used to entertain me by doing that when I was little. Naturally, I never told my parents. When she smiles without her teeth in place, she looks like a witch. But with them in her mouth, she's very pretty. "Come on, Margaret, let's get these bags into the kitchen." I picked up one shopping bag. "Grandma, this is so heavy. What's in it?" "Hot dogs, potato salad, coleslaw, corned beef, rye bread." I laughed. "You mean it's food?" "Of course it's food. But they have food in New Jersey, Grandma." "Not this kind." "Oh, yes," I said, "even delicatessen. No place has delicatessen like New York." I didn't argue about that. Grandma has certain ideas of her own. When we got all the bags into the kitchen, Grandma scrubbed her hands at the sink and put everything into the refrigerator. When she was done, I asked, "How did you get here?" Grandma smiled again, but didn't say anything. She was measuring coffee into the pot. You can't make her talk about something until she's ready. Finally, she sat down at the kitchen table, fluffed out her hair, and said, "I came in a taxi." "All the way from New York?" "No," Grandma said, "from the center of Farbrook." "But how did you get to the center of Farbrook?" "On a train." "Oh, Grandma, you didn't." "Yes, I did. But you always said trains are so dirty." "So what's a little dirt? I'm washable." We both laughed while Grandma changed her shoes. She brought a spare pair along with her knitting in one of the shopping bags. "Now," she said, "take me on a tour of the house." I led her everywhere except upstairs. I pointed out closets, the downstairs bathroom, my mother's new washer and dryer, and where we sat to watch TV. When I was finished, Grandma shook her head and said, "I just don't understand why they had to move to the country." "It's not really country, Grandma," I explained. "There aren't any cows around." "To me it's country," Grandma said. I heard the water running upstairs. "I think they're up. Should I go see?" "You mean, should you go tell?" "Well, should I?" "Of course," Grandma said. I ran up the stairs and into my parents' bedroom. My father was putting on his socks. My mother was brushing her teeth in their bathroom. "Guess who's here?" I said to my father. He didn't say anything. He yawned. "Well, aren't you going to guess?" "Guess what?" he asked. "Guess who's here in this very house at this very minute?" Nobody but us, I hope, my father said. Wrong. I danced around the bedroom. Margaret, my father said in his disgusted with me voice, what is it you're trying to say? Grandma's here. That's impossible, my father told me. I mean it, Daddy. She's right downstairs in the kitchen making your coffee. Barbara? My father went into the bathroom and turned off the water. I followed him. My mother had a mouthful of toothpaste. I'm not done, Herb, she said, turning on the water again. My father shut it off. Guess who's here? He asked her. What do you mean, who's here? My mother said. Sylvia, that's who's here. My father turned the water back on so my mother could finish brushing her teeth. But my mother turned it off and followed my father into the bedroom. I followed too. This was fun. I guess by then my mother must have swallowed her toothpaste. What do you mean, Sylvia? My mother asked my father. I mean my mother, my father said. My mother laughed. That's impossible, Herb. How would she even get here? My father pointed at me. Ask Margaret. She seems to know everything. In a taxi, I said. They didn't say anything. And a train, I said. Still nothing. It wasn't so dirty after all. 10 minutes later, my mother and father joined Grandma in the kitchen where the table was set and the breakfast all ready. It's hard to get mad at Grandma, especially when she flashes her super smile. So my mother and father didn't say anything except what a wonderful surprise and how clever of Grandma to take a train and a taxi to our new house when she'd never been to Farbrook before. After breakfast, I went upstairs to get dressed. Grandma came up with me to see my room. It's a lot bigger than my old one, I said. Yes, it's bigger, Grandma agreed. You could use new bedspreads and curtains. I saw some the other day, pink and red plaid. Then we could get red carpeting to match and, Grandma sighed. But I guess your mother wants to fix it up herself. I guess so, I said. Grandma sat down on my bed. Margaret, darling, she said, I want to make sure you understand that we'll still be as close as always. Of course we will, I said. A few miles doesn't mean a thing, Grandma said. Just because I can't drop in after school doesn't mean I won't think of you every day. I know that, Grandma. I tell you what, I'll call you every night at 7:30. How does that sound? You don't have to call every night, I said. I want to. It's my dime, Grandma laughed. That way you can tell me what's going on and I'll keep you posted about New York, okay? Sure, Grandma. But Margaret, what? You answer the phone. Your mother and father might not like me calling so much. This is just between you and me. All right? Sure, Grandma. I love to get phone calls. We all spent the rest of the day sitting around in our yard. Grandma was knitting me a new sweater. My mother planted some fall flowers, and my father read a book. I sunbathed, thinking it would be nice to start school with a tan. We ate Grandma's food for supper, and every time she bit into a pickle, she said, nothing like the real thing. We drove her back to the Farbrook station while it was still light. Grandma has this thing about walking in New York at night. She's positive she's going to get mugged. Before she got out of the car, she kissed me goodbye and told my parents, now don't worry, I promise I'll only come once a month. Well, maybe twice. And it's not to see you, Herb, or you either, Barbara. I've got to keep an eye on my Margaret. That's all. Grandma winked at me. With that, she grabbed the shopping bag with her shoes and knitting and left, waving goodbye until we couldn't see her anymore. Chapter 4. On Wednesday night, my mother helped me wash my hair. She set it in big rollers for me. I planned to sleep like that all night, but after an hour, they hurt my head, so I took them out. On Thursday morning, I got up early, but I had trouble eating. My mother said it was natural for me to feel uneasy on the first day of school. She said when she was a girl, she felt the same way. My mother's always telling me about when she was a girl. It's supposed to make me feel that she understands everything. I put on my new blue plaid cotton back-to-school dress. My mother likes me in blue. She says it brings out the color in my eyes. I wore my brown loafers without socks. My mother thought that was dumb. Margaret, you have to walk 3/4 of a mile. So? So you know you get blisters every time you go without socks. Well then, I'll just have to suffer. But why suffer? Wear socks. Now that's my point about my mother. I mean, if she understands so much about me, then why couldn't she understand that I had to wear loafers without socks? I told her, Nancy says nobody in the 6th grade wears socks on the first day of school. Margaret, I don't know what I'm going to do with you when you're a teenager if you're acting like this now. That's another thing. My mother's always talking about when I'm a teenager. Stand up straight, Margaret. Good posture now makes for a good figure later. Wash your face with soap, Margaret, then you won't get pimples when you're a teenager. If you ask me, being a teenager is pretty rotten. Between pimples and worrying about how you smell? Finally, my mother told me to have a good day. She kissed my cheek and gave me a pat on the back. I walked down to Nancy's house. By the time I got to room 18 of the Delano Elementary School, my feet hurt so much I thought I wouldn't make it through the day. Why are mothers always right about those things? As it turned out, half the girls had on knee socks anyway. The teacher wasn't in the room when we got there. That is, the real teacher. There was this girl who I thought was the teacher, but she turned out to be a kid in our class. She was very tall. That's why I thought she was the teacher, with eyes shaped like a cat's. You could see the outline of her bra through her blouse, and you could also tell from the front that it wasn't the smallest size. She sat down alone and didn't talk to anyone. I wondered if maybe she was new too, because everybody else was busy talking and laughing about summer vacations and new hairstyles and all that. The class quieted down in a big hurry when a man walked into the room, nodded at us, and wrote a name on the blackboard. Miles J. Benedict, Jr. When he turned away from the blackboard, he cleared his throat. That's me, he said, pointing to the name on the board. Then he cleared his throat 2 more times. I'm your new teacher. Nancy poked me in the ribs and whispered, Can you believe it? The whole class was whispering and grinning. Mr. Benedict went back to the board. He wrote 6 phrases. Then he turned to us. He put his hands behind his back and kind of rocked back and forth on his feet. He cleared his throat so I knew he was going to say something. Now then, you know my name. I'll tell you something about myself. I'm 24 years old. I'm a graduate of Columbia Teachers College, and this is my first teaching position. Now that you know about me, I want to find out about you. So, if you will copy these 6 phrases off the board and then complete them, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. He coughed. I thought he was going to wind up with a very sore throat. Mr. Benedict Jr. handed out the paper himself. I read his phrases. My name is, please call me, I like, I hate, this year in school, I think male teachers are. I nibbled on the edge of my pencil. The first 2 were easy. I wrote, my name is Margaret Ann Simon. Please call me Margaret. The next 2 were harder. I liked and hated a million things, and I didn't know what he wanted to know about. Also, he wouldn't answer any questions. He sat at his desk and watched us. He tapped his fingers and crossed his legs. Finally, I wrote, I like long hair, tuna fish, the smell of rain, and things that are pink. I hate pimples, baked potatoes, when my mother's mad, and religious holidays. This year in school, I want to have fun, and also learn enough to go to 7th grade. I think male teachers are... That was the worst. How was I supposed to know? Every teacher is different, but I couldn't think of a way to fit that in, so I wrote, I think male teachers are the opposite of female teachers. There, that ought to do it. It was a stupid answer, but I thought it was also a pretty stupid question. At 2:30, Nancy slipped me a note. It said, Secret Club meets today after school, my house. No socks. I went home to change before going to Nancy's. My mother was waiting for me. Let's have a snack and you can tell me all about your first day of school, she said. I can't, I told her. No time now. I've got to go to Nancy's house. I'm joining her secret club. Oh, that's nice, my mother said. Just tell me about your teacher. What's she like? It's a he, I said. His name is Mr. Benedict, and this is his first job. Oh, gad, it's a first-year teacher. What could be worse? He's not bad, I told my mother. I thought he was very nice. We'll see how much you learn, my mother said. I changed into shorts and a polo and walked to Nancy's. Chapter 5. The others were already there. Janie Loomis, Gretchen Potter, and Nancy. That was it. We sat around on the porch and Nancy brought us Cokes and cookies. When Gretchen helped herself to 6 Oreos at once, Nancy asked her how much weight she'd gained over the summer. Gretchen put back 4 cookies and said, "Not much." "Did you see Laura Danker come in this morning?" Janie asked. "Which one is she?" I said. They all giggled. Nancy spoke to me as if she were my mother. "Margaret, dear, you can't possibly miss Laura Danker. The big blonde with the big you-know-whats." "Oh, I noticed her right off," I said. "She's very pretty." "Pretty?" Nancy snorted. "You be smart and stay away from her. She's got a bad reputation." "What do you mean?" I asked. "My brother says she goes behind the A&P with him and Moose." "And," Janie added, "she's been wearing a bra since 4th grade, and I'll bet she gets her period." "Did you get it yet, Margaret?" Nancy asked. "Get what?" "Your period," Nancy said, like I should have known. "Oh, no, not yet. Did you?" Nancy swallowed some soda and shook her head. "None of us has yet." I was glad to hear that. I mean, suppose they all got it already and I was the only one who didn't. I'd feel awful. Gretchen smacked her lips, brushed the cookie crumbs off her lap, and said, "Let's get down to business." "Agreed," Nancy said. "First of all, we need a good club name this year. Everybody think up a name for our club." It got quiet. Everybody thought. I didn't really think, but I pretended to. I didn't even know anything about the club, so how could I pick out a name? Gretchen suggested the SGCT, which meant the 6th grade cuties. Janie said that sounded really dumb. So Gretchen told Janie if she was so smart, why didn't she suggest a name? Janie suggested the MJB girls, which meant the Miles J. Benedict girls. Nancy told Janie she'd forgotten the junior on the end of his name. Janie got mad and excused herself to go to the bathroom. "As long as we're on this subject," Nancy said, "what do you think of Miles J.?" "I think he's cute," Gretchen giggled. "He is, but he's too skinny," Nancy said. Then I finally thought of something to say. "I wonder if he's married." Janie joined us again. "My guess is no. He doesn't look married." "Anyhow, did you see the way he looked at Laura?" Nancy asked. "No, did he?" Gretchen opened her eyes wide. "Naturally, men can't help looking at her," Nancy said. "But do you think she looks that way on purpose?" I asked. The others laughed, and Nancy said, "Oh, Margaret." Nancy had a great way of making me feel like a dope. Then we talked about Mr. Benedict's questions, and Gretchen told us that she wrote male teachers are very strict. Because if Mr. Benedict thought we were afraid of him, he'd bend over backwards to be really easygoing and nice. I thought that was pretty clever and wished I had written it myself. "Well, the whole idea of those questions is just to find out if we're normal," Janie said. I hadn't thought about that. Now it was too late. "How can you tell if we're normal?" I asked. "That's easy," Nancy said, "from the way you answered. Like if you said, 'I hate my mother, my father, and my brother,' you might be weird. Get it?" I got it. Nancy snapped her fingers. "I have the perfect name for our club," she said. "What is it?" Gretchen asked. "Tell us," Janie said. "We'll be the 4 PTSs. "What's it stand for?" Janie asked. Nancy tossed her hair around and smiled. "The Pre-Teen Sensations." "Hey, that's good," Gretchen said. "I love it," Janie squealed. We had a secret vote to pass the club name, and naturally it passed. Then Nancy decided we should all have secret sensational names, such as Alexandra, Veronica, Kimberly, and Mavis. Nancy got to be Alexandra. I was Mavis. Nancy reminded us that nobody in school was to know anything about our secret club, and that at secret meetings such as this, we were to use our secret names. We all had to solemnly swear. Then we all had to think up a rule. Nancy's rule was, we all had to wear bras. I felt my cheeks turn red. I wondered if the others wore them already. I didn't think Janie did because she looked down at the floor after Nancy said it. Gretchen's rule was, the first one to get her period had to tell the others all about it, especially how it feels. Janie's rule was, we all had to keep a boy book, which was a notebook with a list of boys' names in order of how we liked them. Each week we had to change our lists and pass the boy books around. Finally, Nancy asked me what my rule was. I couldn't think of one to equal the others, so I said, we meet on a certain day each week. Naturally, Nancy said, but what day? Well, I don't know, I told her. Okay, let's think up a good day, Gretchen said. Tuesday and Thursday are out. I have to go to Hebrew school. Oh, Gretchen, Janie said, you and that Hebrew school business. Can't you get out of it? I'd love to, Gretchen explained, but I've got to go one more year, and then I'm through. What about you, Margaret? Do you go? Janie asked me. You mean to Hebrew school? Yes. No, I don't go, I said. Margaret doesn't even go to Sunday school. Isn't that right? Nancy asked. Yes, I answered. How'd you arrange that? Gretchen asked. I'm not any religion, I said. You're not? Gretchen's mouth fell open. What are your parents? Janie asked. Nothing, I said. How positively neat, Gretchen said. Then they all just looked at me and nobody said anything, and I felt pretty silly. So I tried to explain. See, my father was Jewish, and my mother was Christian, and Nancy's face lit up. Go on, she said. This was the first time they were interested in anything I had to say. Well, my mother's parents, who live in Ohio, told her they didn't want a Jewish son-in-law. If she wanted to ruin her life, that was her business, but they would never accept my father for her husband. No kidding, Gretchen said. How about your father's family? Well, my grandmother wasn't happy about getting a Christian daughter-in-law, but she at least accepted the situation. So what happened? Janie asked. They eloped. How romantic, Nancy sighed. So that's why they're not anything. I don't blame them, Gretchen said. I wouldn't be either. But if you aren't any religion, how are you going to know if you should join the Y or the Jewish Community Center? Janie asked. I don't know, I said. I never thought about it. Maybe we won't join either one. But everybody belongs to one or the other, Nancy said. Well, I guess that will be up to my parents, I said, ready to change the subject. I never meant to tell them my story in the first place. So, what day should we meet? Nancy announced that Friday was no good for a meeting day because she had piano lessons. Janie said she had ballet on Wednesday, so I said that only left Mondays, and we agreed that Monday would be our meeting day. Next week we had to bring our boy books and get checked to make sure we were all wearing bras. When the meeting was over, Nancy raised her arms high above her head. She closed her eyes and whispered, Here's to the 4 PTSs. Hooray! Long live the PTSs, we chanted. All through supper, I thought about how I was going to tell my mother I wanted to wear a bra. I wondered why she hadn't ever asked me if I wanted one, since she knew so much about being a girl. When she came in to kiss me goodnight, I said it. I want to wear a bra. Just like that, no beating around the bush. My mother turned the bedroom light back on. Margaret? How come? I just do is all. I hid under the covers so she couldn't see my face. My mother took a deep breath. Well, if you really want to, we'll have to go shopping on Saturday, okay? Okay, I smiled. My mother wasn't bad. She turned out the light and closed my door halfway. Was I glad that was over? Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. I just told my mother I want a bra. Please help me grow, God. You know where. I want to be like everyone else. You know, God, my new friends all belong to the Y or the Jewish Community Center. Which way am I supposed to go? I don't know what you want me to do about that. Chapter 6. The next day after school, Mr. Benedict called me up to his desk. Margaret, he said, I'd like to discuss your getting to know you paper. For instance, why do you hate religious holidays? Was I sorry I wrote that? How positively stupid of me. If it was true that he was trying to find out if we were normal, I guess he thought I wasn't. I half laughed. Oh, I just wrote that, I said. I really don't hate them at all. You must have had a reason. You can tell me. It's confidential. I raised my right eyebrow at Mr. Benedict. I can do that really good. Raise one without the other. I do it whenever I can't think of anything to say. People notice it right away. Some people actually ask me how I do it. They forget what we were talking about and concentrate on my right eyebrow. I don't know exactly how I do it. What I do is think about it and the eyebrow goes up. I can't do it with my left, only my right. Mr. Benedict noticed, but he didn't ask me anything about how I do it. He just said, I'm sure you have a perfectly good reason for hating religious holidays. I knew he was waiting for me to say something. He wasn't going to just forget about it, so I decided to get it over with in a hurry. None of those holidays are special to me. I don't belong to any religion, I said. Mr. Benedict seemed pleased, like he had uncovered some deep, dark mystery. I see. And your parents? They aren't any religion. I'm supposed to choose my own when I grow up. If I want to, that is. Mr. Benedict folded his hands and looked at me for a while. Then he said, Okay, Margaret, you can go now. I hoped he decided I was normal, after all. I lived in New York for 11.5 years, and I don't think anybody ever asked me about my religion. I never even thought about it. Now, all of a sudden, it was the big thing in my life. That night when Grandma called, she told me she'd gotten a subscription to Lincoln Center for the two of us. We'd meet one Saturday a month, have lunch, and then go to a concert. Grandma really is clever. She knew my parents would never say no to one Saturday a month at Lincoln Center. That was culture, and they thought culture was very important. And now Grandma and I would have a chance to spend some time alone. But I was glad that Lincoln Center didn't start right away, because I didn't want anything to interfere with Bra Day. First thing on Saturday morning, Moose Freed arrived to cut our lawn. My father sulked behind a sports magazine. His finger was a lot better, but it was still bandaged. I sat around outside while Moose cut the grass. I liked the way he sang as he worked. I also liked his teeth. I saw them when he smiled at me. They were very clean and white, and one in the front was a little crooked. I pretended to be really busy reading a book, but the truth is, I was watching Moose. If he looked toward me, I put my nose back in the book in a hurry. Moose would be number one in my boy book if only I was brave enough. But what would Nancy think? She hated him. After lunch, my mother told my father we were going shopping. We still had our same car, but my mother thought we needed two now because there weren't any buses in Farbrook and taxis were so expensive. My father said he'd see, but I knew we'd be getting another one soon. My mother can talk my father into anything. My mother drove to a shopping center where there was a Lord and Taylor. I had on my blue plaid dress and my loafers without socks and 3 Band-Aids on my blisters. First, we went to the ladies' lingerie department, where my mother told the sales lady we wanted to see a bra for me. The sales lady took one look and told my mother we'd be better off in the teen department, where they had bras in very small sizes. My mother thanked the lady, and I almost died. We went down on the escalator and headed for the teen shop. They had a whole display of underwear there, bras and panties and slips to match. All I ever wore was white underpants and regular undershirts, sometimes a slip if I was going to a party. My mother went to the counter and told the sales lady we were interested in a bra. I stood back and pretended not to know a thing. I even bent down to scratch a new mosquito bite. "Come here, dear," the sales lady called. I hate people who call you dear. I walked over to the counter and raised my right eyebrow at her. She reached over the top of the counter and said, "Let's measure you, dear." She put the tape measure all the way around me and smiled at my mother. 28, she said. I felt like giving her a pinch. Then she took out a bunch of bras and put them on the counter in front of us. My mother felt them all. Now, dear, I suggest the Grow Bra. It grows with you. You're not quite ready for a double A. Suppose you try them on and see which is most comfortable. She led us to a dressing room with a pink door that locked. My mother sat in the dressing room on a chair. I took off my dress. I wasn't wearing anything underneath but pants. I picked up the first bra and stuck my arms into the straps. I couldn't fasten it in back. My mother had to help me. She adjusted the straps and felt the front of me. "How does it feel?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Is it too tight?" "No." "Too loose?" "No." "Do you like it?" "I guess." "Try on this one." She got me out of the first bra and into the next one. I wondered how I'd ever learn to do it by myself. Maybe my mother would have to dress me every day. The next bra was softer than the first. My mother explained it was made of Dacron. I liked the way it felt. My mother nodded. The third one was fancy. It was lace and it made me itch. My mother said it was impractical. The sales lady knocked on the door as I was getting back into my dress. "How did we do? Did we find something?" My mother told her we did. "We'll take 3 of these," she said, holding up the soft bra. When we got back to the counter, who should be there but Janie Loomis and her mother. "Oh, hi, Margaret," she said. "I'm getting some winter pajamas." Her cheeks were bright red, and I saw the selection of bras on the counter in front of her. "Me too," I said. "I'm getting some flannel pajamas for winter." "Well, see you Monday," Janie said. "Right, Monday." I was plenty glad that my mother was down at the other end of the counter paying for my bras. Chapter 7. When I got home, I carried my package straight to my room. I took off my dress and put on the bra. I fastened it first around my waist, then wiggled it up to where it belonged. I threw my shoulders back and stood sideways. I didn't look any different. I took out a pair of socks and stuffed one sock into each side of the bra to see if it really grew with me. It was too tight that way, but I liked the way it looked. Like Laura Danker. I took the socks out and put them away. My father congratulated me at dinner. "Well, you're really growing up, Margaret. No more little girl." "Oh, Daddy," was all I could think of to say. On Monday, I studied the boys in my class. I had to have some names for my boy book before 3 o'clock. I picked Philip Leroy because he was the best-looking one. Also Jay Hassler because he had nice brown eyes and clean fingernails. I decided to leave it at that and explain I didn't know anybody else. Right before the bell rang, Mr. Benedict told us that he was going to ask us each to do a year-long individual project. Everybody groaned. Mr. Benedict held up his hands. "Now, it's not as bad as it sounds, class. For one thing, it's personal, between each of you and me. I'm not going to ask what your topic is. I expect you to choose it yourself and work it up in your own way. The only thing I insist on is that it be something, meaningful." More groans. Mr. Benedict looked crushed. "I had hoped you would find this interesting." Poor Mr. Benedict. He was really disappointed. The way he talked to us, I got the feeling we made him nervous. Nobody seemed scared of him at all, and you should always be a little scared of your teacher. Sometimes he just sat at his desk and looked out at us like he couldn't believe we were really there. Of course, Nancy pointed out that he never, ever called on Laura Danker. I hadn't noticed. As we were getting in line to go home, he reminded us that on Thursday we'd have a test on the first 2 chapters in our social studies book. He asked us to please be prepared. Most teachers never say please. After school, we went straight to Nancy's. Before we started our official meeting, we talked about Mr. Benedict and his project. We all agreed it was crazy, and none of us could think of a single idea. Then Nancy called the roll. Veronica? I'm here, Gretchen said. Kimberly? I'm here, Janie said. Mavis? I'm here, I said. And so am I, Alexandra. Nancy closed the roll book. Well, let's get to it. We all feel each other's backs to make sure we're wearing our bras. We all were. What size did you get, Janie? Gretchen asked. I got a grow bra, Janie said. Me too, I said. Me too, Gretchen laughed. Not me, Nancy said proudly. Mine's a 32 double A. We were all impressed. If you ever want to get out of those baby bras, you have to exercise, she told us. What kind of exercise? Gretchen asked. Like this, Nancy said. She made fists, bent her arms at the elbow, and moved them back and forth, sticking her chest way out. She said, I must increase my bust. She said it over and over. We copied her movements and chanted with her. We must increase our bust. Good, Nancy told us. Do it 35 times a day, and I promise you'll see the results. Now, for our boy books, Gretchen said. Is everybody ready? We put our boy books on the floor, and Nancy picked them up, one at a time. She read each one and passed it around for the rest of us to see. Janie's was first. She had 7 names listed. Number 1 was Philip Leroy. Gretchen had 4 names. Number 1 was Philip Leroy. Nancy listed 18 boys. I didn't even know 18 boys. And number 1 was Philip Leroy. When Nancy got to my boy book, she choked on an ice cube from her glass of Coke. When she stopped choking, she read, Number 1, Philip Leroy. Everybody giggled. Number 2, Jay Hassler. How come you picked him? I was getting mad. I mean, she didn't ask the others why they liked this one or that one, so why should I have to tell? I raised my eyebrow at Nancy, then looked away. She got the message. When we were through, Nancy opened her bedroom door. There were Evan and Moose, eavesdropping. They followed us down the stairs and outside. When Nancy said, Get lost, we're busy, Evan and Moose burst out laughing. They shouted, We must increase our bust. Then they fell on the grass and rolled over and over, laughing so hard I hoped they would both wet their pants. On Wednesday, during an arithmetic review, I heard a bird go peep. Lots of other kids heard it too. And so did Mr. Benedict. I know because he looked up. I went back to my problems, but pretty soon I heard it again. Peep! After the second peep, Mr. Benedict walked to the window and opened it wide. He stuck his head way out, looking all around. While he was doing that, 3 more peeps came from the room. Mr. Benedict walked to his desk and stood with his hands behind his back. Peep! I looked at Nancy. I was sure it came from her, but she didn't look at me or say anything. Mr. Benedict sat down and tapped his fingers on the top of his desk. Pretty soon our room sounded like a pet store full of birds. Every second there was another peep. It was hard not to giggle. When Nancy kicked me under the table, I knew it was my turn. I looked down and erased my answer to a problem. While I was blowing the eraser dust away, I said it, Peep! By the time Mr. Benedict looked my way, another peep came from across the room. I think it was Philip Leroy. We kept waiting for Mr. Benedict to say something, but he didn't. When we came in the next morning, our desks had been rearranged. Instead of 4 tables, our desks formed one big U shape across the room. There were name cards taped onto each desk. On one side, I was next to Freddie Barnett, who I didn't like at all. I knew for a fact that he was a troublemaker because I saw him stand behind Jay Hassler on the first day of school, and just as Jay was about to sit down, Freddie Barnett pulled his chair away. Jay wound up on the floor. I hate kids who do that. I'd have to be very careful not to fall into the trap of the lobster. That's what we call him, because on the first day of school, he was sunburned bright red. But on the other side of me, things were even worse. I was next to Laura Danker. I was afraid to even look her way. Nancy warned me that reputations were catching. Well, I didn't have to worry because Laura didn't look my way either. She looked straight ahead. Naturally, the 4 PTSs were all separated, but Nancy, that lucky, got to sit next to Philip Leroy. There wasn't any more peeping. Mr. Benedict reminded us of our social studies test the next day. That afternoon we had gym. The boys got to play baseball with Mr. Benedict. The girls were left with the gym teacher, Miss Abbott, who told us to line up in order of size. I was third from the front end. Janie was first. Laura Danker was last. Gretchen and Nancy were in the middle. After we lined up, Miss Abbott talked about posture and how important it is to stand up straight. No matter how tall you are, you must never slouch, because height is such a blessing. With that, Miss Abbott stood up and took some deep breaths. She must have been at least 6 feet tall. Janie and I looked at each other and giggled. We were not blessed. Then Miss Abbott told us since we were in 6th grade and very grown up, there were certain subjects we would cover during the school year. Certain very private subjects just for girls. That was all she said, but I got the idea. Why do they wait until 6th grade when you already know everything? That night I really worked hard. I read the first 2 chapters in my social studies book 4 times. Then I sat on my bedroom floor and did my exercise. I must increase my bust. I did it 35 times and climbed into bed. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. I just did an exercise to help me grow. Have you thought about it, God? About my growing, I mean. I've got a bra now. It would be nice if I had something to put in it. Of course, if you don't think I'm ready, I'll understand. I'm having a test in school tomorrow. Please let me get a good grade on it, God. I want you to be proud of me. Thank you. The next morning, Mr. Benedict passed out the test paper himself. The questions were already on the board. He said to begin as soon as we got our paper. Freddie the lobster poked me and whispered, "No name." "What do you mean, no name?" I whispered back. Freddie whispered, "Nobody signs his name. Benedict won't know whose paper is whose. Get it?" I got it all right, but I didn't like it, especially since I'd read the chapters 4 times. But if nobody was going to put a name on the test paper, I wasn't going to either. I felt cheated because Mr. Benedict would never know how hard I'd studied. I answered all the questions in 15 minutes. Mr. Benedict asked Janie to collect the papers for him. I couldn't imagine what he would do to us when he found out nobody had put a name on the test. I figured he'd be plenty mad, but you can't do much to a whole class except keep them after school. We couldn't all be expelled, could we? Chapter 8. On Friday morning, when we walked into our room, there was a test paper on everyone's desk. Every paper was marked and had the proper name on it. I got a 98. I felt great. Freddie Barnett didn't feel great at all. He got a 53. Mr. Benedict didn't say anything about our names not being on the test papers. He just stood there and smiled. "Good morning, class," he said, without clearing his throat. I think he knew he'd won the battle. Later that day, Mr. Benedict reminded us of our individual projects again. He told us not to wait until the last minute and think we could whip something up then. He said by the end of next week, we should all know our topic and start in on our notes. I thought a lot about it, but I didn't know anything meaningful that I was willing to share with Mr. Benedict. I mean, I couldn't very well come up with a year-long study about bras and what goes in them, or about my feelings toward Moose, or about God. Or could I? I mean, not about God exactly. I could never tell Mr. Benedict that, but maybe about religion. If I could figure out which religion to be, I'd know if I wanted to join the Y or the Jewish Community Center. That was meaningful, wasn't it? I'd have to think about it. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. What would you think of me doing a project on religion? You wouldn't mind, would you, God? I'd tell you all about it, and I won't make any decisions without asking you first. I think it's time for me to decide what to be. I can't go on being nothing forever. Can I? The following Saturday morning, my mother drove me to the highway to get the New York bus. It was my first time going alone, and my mother was nervous. Listen, Margaret, don't sit next to any men. Either sit alone or pick out a nice lady, and try to sit up front. If the bus isn't air-conditioned, open your window, and when you get there, ask a lady to show you the way downstairs. Grandma will meet you at the information desk. I know. We've been over it 3 dozen times, but when the bus came, my mother got out of the car and shouted to the bus driver, "This little girl is traveling alone. Please keep an eye on her. It's her first trip." "Don't worry, lady," the bus driver told my mother. Then my mother waved to me. I made a face at her and looked the other way. I found Grandma right where she was supposed to be. She gave me a big kiss. Grandma smelled delicious. She was wearing a green suit and had on lots of green eyeshadow to match. Her hair was silver blonde. Grandma's hair color changes about once a month. When we were out of the bus terminal, Grandma said, "You look beautiful, Margaret. I love your hair." Grandma always has something nice to say to me, and my hair did look better. I read that if you brush it good, it can grow up to 1 inch a month. We went to lunch at a restaurant near Lincoln Center. During my chocolate parfait, I whispered, "I'm wearing a bra. Can you tell?" "Of course I can tell," Grandma said. "You can?" I was really surprised. I stopped eating. "Well, how do you think it makes me look?" "Much older," Grandma said, between sips of her coffee. I didn't know whether to believe her or not, so I believed her. Then we went to the concert. I didn't fidget like when I was a little kid. I sat very still and paid attention to the music. During intermission, Grandma and I walked around outside. I love that fountain in the middle of Lincoln Center. I love it more than the concerts themselves, and I love to watch the people walk by. Once I saw a model having her picture taken by the fountain. It was freezing cold and she was wearing a summer dress. That's when I decided not to be a model, even if I did get beautiful someday. In the cab, on the way back to the bus terminal, I thought about Grandma being Jewish. She was the perfect person to help me start my project. So I asked her, "Can I go to temple with you sometime?" Grandma absolutely stared at me. I never knew anyone could open her eyes so wide. What are you saying? Are you saying you want to be Jewish?" She held her breath. "No, I'm saying I'd like to go to temple and see what it's all about." "My Margaret!" Grandma threw her arms around me. I think the cab driver thought we were crazy. "I knew you were a Jewish girl at heart. I always knew it." Grandma took out a lace hanky and dabbed her eyes. "I'm not, Grandma," I insisted. "You know I'm not anything." "You can say it, but I'll never believe it. Never." She blew her nose. When she finished blowing, she said, "I know what it is. You've made a lot of Jewish friends in Farbrook. Am I right?" "No, Grandma, my friends have nothing to do with this." "Then what? I don't understand." "I just want to see what it's all about. So, can I?" I certainly was not going to tell Grandma about Mr. Benedict. Grandma sat back in her seat and beamed at me. "I'm thrilled. I'm going right home to call the rabbi." "You'll come with me on Rosh Hashanah." Then she stopped smiling and asked, "Does your mother know?" I shook my head. "Your father?" I shook it again. Grandma slapped her hand against her forehead. "Be sure to tell them it's not my idea. Would I be in trouble?" "Don't worry, Grandma." "That's ridiculous," my mother said when I told her. "You know how Daddy and I feel about religion." "You said I could choose when I grow up." "But you're not ready to choose yet, Margaret." "I just want to try it out," I argued. "I'm going to try church too, so don't get hysterical." "I am not hysterical. I just think it's foolish for a girl of your age to bother herself with religion." "Can I go?" I asked. "I'm not going to stop you," my mother said. "Fine, then I'll go." On Rosh Hashanah morning, while I was still in bed, I said, "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. I'm going to temple today, with Grandma. It's a holiday. I guess you know that. Well, my father thinks it's a mistake, and my mother thinks the whole idea is crazy, but I'm going anyway. I'm sure this will help me decide what to be. I've never been inside a temple or a church. I'll look for you, God.